Welcome back to 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network. Josh Doring, Chris Brown, they are here with me on a Monday. Thank you for joining us on 110 Daily on 110 Sports Network. Gentlemen, let's talk about some national title contenders. Would you like to go from 1 to 5 or from 5 to 1? Because I would argue that 1 to 5 is more intriguing because
sure. Let's do it that way.
we're going to have the same three teams in some order in the top three. And then when we get to the end, then things are slightly more interesting. So we'll start with 1. I mean, if you don't have Gonzaga 1, you might as well leave the call. Do we need confessions right now? Do we need confessions? Is Gonzaga number 1 on everybody's list? Because they should be.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. I was thinking I'd just leave the call and that would be my sign of no, but yeah. No. Yes.
This isn't hard. Gonzaga's been the best team in the country since the very beginning of the season. They've given us very little reason to think that that's not the case. It has been a little while since we've seen them play a good basketball team, but at the same time, it's not like they're having those nights where they're barely getting by West Coast Conference teams. I mean, we're talking, 85-62, 86-69, 116-88, 95-70, 73-59, one of their closer games, 95-49, 90-62, 97-75, 76-58, 100-61, 106-69, 86-69. It's not like they're Gonzaga's quietly taken a small step back. We just haven't realized it because they're playing West Coast Conference opponents. I'd love to see them play a tournament team again. That'd be lit. But with that being said, they've done literally nothing to make you feel like they're not the best team in the sport and just completely steamrolling West Coast Conference opponents in a way that even, some of these other great Gonzaga teams didn't. They just haven't had an off night in conference play. And it's not because of the competition necessarily that they have finished undefeated. They've just been that good from the jump this season.
Right. They've won their 15 conference games by an average of 24.1 points. That's their average margin of victory. I don't have anything else to add. Clear best team in the country. Would love to see them take on a top team, just like you said.
The other thing I'll throw out there is they're also, when you're talking about these top teams, the most proven group in March.
Sure.
Now, they're not very proven because the last time we had an NCAA tournament, these guys were role players.
Sure.
Not stars, and Jalen Suggs was in the middle of his high school career.
Right, was taking biology with Miss Smith junior year of high school.
Yeah. Right. But these guys have been around this program. Kispert, Timmy, you've got some NCAA tournament experience there. Mark Few's done this a million times. He's gone to a national championship game, plenty of Elite Eights. So that's the other advantage that makes this even less of a discussion is not only are they the best team, not only have they been the most impressive, but they also, if I'm just picking a team, all other things being equal, I want this one.
Sure.
So they check every box.
Yeah, absolutely. Number 2, Josh, we'll start with you.
I still got Baylor 2.
Okay.
Ultimately, I still want the superior backcourt in the tournament, and I just love this Baylor backcourt. Yes, it's a real concern that Jared Butler has disappeared for large portions of important games. It's happened multiple times. That can't go unnoticed. But you still have, whether it's Maceo Teague or Davion Mitchell, usually one of them finds a way to still produce, even if it's not Jared Butler.
Sure.
I don't think the COVID pause is going to be a factor by then. I trust that they're going to be able to figure this out. So the win-loss record seeding stuff doesn't really matter to me because of the weird circumstance they find themselves in, where they're trying to get back to full speed while also playing a bunch of top 25 teams at the very end of the regular season. It's a strange thing. And I'm not going to change my tune on this team that I've been so high on all season because they lost to a Kansas team playing really well and because Iowa State gave them a scare coming out of a COVID pause. I feel very differently about how their resume stacks up with Michigan, but that's not the conversation we're having here. Sure. So I still have them too.
Chris?
I've gone ahead and made the switch. I've swapped them out. I have Michigan at number 2. It was very close. I actually had Baylor at number 2, and then I swapped it late last night because I was going back and forth. It's one of those things where if Baylor takes care of business, gets back on track the rest of the way, I'm willing to make that switch back. But at this point in time, I guess I just put a little bit. I mean, it's small margins. Like we know it's small margins. I guess I'm going to put a little bit of weight in the way these teams are trending right now, considering how close we are to the NCAA tournament. I just put as a sort of a tiebreaker for me, the way the teams are trending, because it's sort of a I don't know exactly what it's going to look, how I'm going to feel about this a week from now. I think that's when I'm going to be more sort of confident that I'm going to, in how this plays out. It's really going to depend on how Baylor performs over the next week. But simply put, as a deciding factor, I want to see Baylor turn it around before, I'm happy to go back and put them at number 2 and reverse my decision, but I just need to see them get back on track. I'm going to put it in I'm going to give it to Michigan right now just because the way things are trending.
Sure. I stuck with Baylor. If we were game 3 and Baylor still didn't look right at all, it'd be Michigan. Yep. I kept Baylor here because I still want Baylor as the healthy basketball team and the on track, not COVID pause basketball team. Like Michigan at its height, Baylor at its height, I still want Baylor, and I think I do have faith that we'll get back to that point, at least closer, if not all the way there, with Baylor before the NCAA tournament starts, and we'll have a Baylor team that we have more faith in before the before the NCAA tournament starts. It's very close. If Baylor comes out flat in their next game and looks bad again, and we were to do this again on Friday, then I would have Michigan 2. It's very close, but the Bears hold on ever so slightly, and at the foundation of it is something that I've always harped on. I want the best backcourts in March, and no matter how you spin it, Baylor still has the better backcourt, and even if Jared Butler has had some stinkers and big moments, I still want the better backcourt. That's gonna be my all-time tiebreaker. Is who has the better backcourt when these teams are this close. And not that I'm saying, no disrespect to Mike Smith or Eli Brooks or Isaiah Livers, but Baylor has one of the best backcourts in the country, if not the best backcourt in the country. So I'll stick ever so slightly with the Bears.
There's also a couple other factors in here for me, which is why I went Michigan 3 and Baylor 2. Juwan Howard's never coached an NCAA tournament game. He has never done this before.
I mean, saying Scott Drew has done it to the highest level or this team has done it to this level wouldn't be completely accurate, but at least he's been there.
Right, and just understands what the turnaround is like, how you prep for these games, how to win 2 games in a short span over that, sort of that extended weekend, if you will, to get to weekend number 2. Uh-huh. He's done that part of it.
Yeah.
Right. This is not a guy with a bunch of Final Fours under his belt. But there is a chance that somehow Juwan Howard gets caught off guard. Now, do I think he will? No. I've got an immense amount of confidence in him as a coach. But when you're pulling hairs between these teams, that's something. The other 2 things, Michigan is still reliant on the 3, or the offense can look clunky. And Michigan's a great shooting team, but Baylor's the best shooting team in the country when everything is right. So again, I'm operating in a world where we're back to getting the Baylor we expect. And they're the best 3-point shooting team in the country. And then finally, I don't know who the guy is from Michigan that's taking a final shot. I don't know who the guy that you're putting the ball in their hands is. You've got options, but to me, it's much clearer what Baylor can do. So it's those little things. But I'm right there with you, Josh. If we see one more bad performance and we're talking about 3 games, it has to switch.
Not right. I think all of those are completely valid. Whether or not you're right, even if Jared Butler's having a horrible game, if it's late, you feel good about Jared Butler taking the final shot.
Exactly.
And there are guys I feel good about taking a final shot for Michigan. It's just not obvious. And the best player on that team is a guy that is best in the post, and that's just not typically what happens on a final possession, right? So I think that's fair as well. And it is an interesting conversation because Baylor, the last time they were in the tournament, these guys also weren't the most important players on their team. Like Gonzaga, like Michigan to a certain extent, we have so many teams, if not every team, that the last time these teams were in the tournament, the most important players weren't these guys. Maybe they were the most important players last year, whether it's Dosunmu or Isaiah Livers or Jared Butler, Maceo Teague, and Davion Mitchell, but we never got to see them in the tournament. It's an interesting conversation that we can only wonder about and speculate about how they're going to react to the NCAA tournament when we get there, because we haven't seen these guys there and that's the case with almost every top team, that we just haven't seen them yet because of not getting the 2020 NCAA tournament. I have Michigan 3 as well. Chris, I'm assuming you have Baylor 3. I won't speak for you, but that would be my guess.
Yeah. Baylor's 3. It's so close between Baylor and Michigan for me. It's like I said, I'm sort of, I guess I'm reacting I'm reacting a little bit faster than, not faster, a little bit sooner than you guys, but it's also one of those things where I guess in the end, my sort of philosophy is it doesn't really matter how much I react at this point, because I'm going to be more confident in my reaction once we get past this week, no matter how it goes. Right. So it's sort of like, I guess in some point, but I guess at that point, by that same logic, it's like, well, why even talk about it now? Wait till there's always going to be sort of arbitrary cutoff points to have these discussions. I guess I would just say, with Michigan, I'm more it's more about my optimism for Michigan than my real concern about Baylor, that I swapped those two teams, or just that the perfect set of circumstances with that optimism and a little bit of recency concern with Baylor. But I have them at number 3. I don't really have anything to add about them. I certainly understand those little X factor things you guys pointed out, and there's a very good chance that I'm right back there with you. If we do this come Friday or Monday, I'm right back there with you in terms of order on that.
And there's a good chance that we're right with you.
Right. It just depends on how this goes, right? It's sort of one of those things where I think we'll all be in the same boat come the end of the stretch, one way or the other.
Number 4, Josh.
Illinois. Because once again, this is not a conversation about who's most likely to reach the Final Four. It's a conversation about who's most likely to win a national championship. You don't know what you're getting from Illinois sometimes, which has been the big knock on them. But what they've been able to do without Dosunmu, the fact that Dosunmu should theoretically be healthy and at full strength by the time we get into this conversation, and the fact that I love this team's ceiling, combined with what we've seen from Ohio State, I didn't really have to think too hard about this. That when this team is playing at their best, I firmly believe now that they are the 4th best team in the country, 4th most dangerous team in the country. My concern is not whether they're capable of playing with Baylor if they get another shot at them, or Michigan or Gonzaga or whatever. It's, can they take care of business to give themselves an opportunity?
Can they beat the 9 seed in the second round?
Right. Yeah. Right. Can they beat the 4 seed in the Sweet 16? Those kind of things.
Right.
Because we've harped on this. You get a bad game from Dosunmu and the role players don't show up, they are incredibly vulnerable.
Or you just get a 90% of Dosunmu because he's got a broken face. Then it becomes even more vulnerable.
But when you're getting a team that can beat Wisconsin without him, it's But to me, this is a question of ceiling, because there are 3 teams and there's everybody else. So the team I'm going to go with after the 3 teams is the team that I feel like has the highest ceiling, that at their best is the most dangerous, and I have no doubt in my mind that's Illinois.
Chris?
Yeah, I thought about Illinois here. And I certainly agree with their ceiling being among the, if not the very best outside of these top 3 teams. But the risk, it's a combination for me when I think about this, of ceiling, but also odds, percentages. What's the percentage that they get tripped up and lose in an early game to a good team, and something happens and the Sunmu's not at 100%? Like, it's, the upside is there, but I think there's also just too much risk of I would not be surprised to see Illinois make a win, to make a deep run, to go all the way to the national title game, to win a championship. That would not stun me if the right circumstances are there. I just don't have a high enough percentage. You combine that sort of upside with percentage that's going to happen that I don't have them at 4. I have Iowa at 4, which
Interesting.
also comes with plenty of concerns too. Like it's like I don't feel like I have an X factor here that sort of led me to my decision, but I think it also might be a bit of an overreaction at the same time. So I think that they've somewhat quietly made some defensive strides. You
They
take
have.
out their
Sure,
You
yeah.
take out their Michigan game, and you look at their last 5 games outside of that Michigan game. They've held opponents to an average of under 63 points per game. That's Rutgers, Michigan State, Wisconsin, Penn State, and Ohio State. They've also held their opponents to basically 30% from 3-point range during that span. Obviously, it's not horrible, but it's pretty darn good. You look at their schedule, and you know outside of inexplicably losing twice to Indiana and an overtime loss at Minnesota, there just aren't many things in here that I'm like, oh wow, those were horrible losses. I don't think they can compete with these great teams. Like Gonzaga by 10, at Illinois by 5. These are losses. Versus Ohio State by 4, and then of course they got clubbed by Michigan, but okay. I think that Michigan game is looking
That
like
was
the
funny.
outlier to me.
Mhm.
Like
Mhm.
just in terms of recent performance, it was one of those things where I wanted to see how they did after that Michigan game. Like, did they, are there real concern? I'm starting to think that the recipe is there for this. And I'm not saying that they made defensive strides that they're all of a sudden a good defensive team, but we're just talking about just making enough defensive strides that I feel more confident that if their offense isn't on firing on all cylinders, that they can still find a way to win. So I have them at 4. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that I'm really confident in it, and I'm absolutely for understanding arguments against having them in this vicinity at all. Um, I will say I think that they carry with them plenty of upside as well. Sort of in that same conversation in terms of upside. It was close with Illinois. They were a team that I was considering here too, but for now I'm going with Iowa 4.
I think the thing that concerns me the most with Iowa, and even and to your point, none of their losses are bad, but they haven't beat any of the best teams that they've played, which is except for Ohio State. So they have this Ohio State win, but and that's certainly encouraging. But before this, right, their losses were to Gonzaga, their losses were to Illinois, their losses were to Ohio State. Prior to beating Ohio State on Sunday, their best win was Purdue?
Probably.
Rutgers?
Maybe, yeah.
Wisconsin?
Yeah.
My
Yeah,
perfect.
but that Rutgers win was impressive at the time it came, which is a shame that always gets lost in this. Is sort of the context.
Oh, the first Rutgers
Right.
one. Yeah.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
True.
They went in there and they really had to, and that was when Rutgers was at their height. I would argue that's the most impressive win, but
Sure.
the metrics probably won't bear that out at this point.
So the point I'm getting to is that them
Sure.
beating Ohio State at Ohio State, that's immediately their best win and shows
Right.
me that they can go toe to toe with another one of the best teams in the country and not blow me out of the water great from the field. They only scored 73. They still won by 16. And that's an encouraging sign. So that would be the only hesitation I have with Iowa, is that when we've seen them against the best teams that they've played prior to Sunday, they didn't look. It wasn't just it was a close game and they lost. The other team looked like the better team, and that was that would be my only hesitation. But at the same time, if they play average defense in the tournament and have a good 2 weeks from the 3-point line, and Luka Garza plays like the best player in the country, right? There's a reason that Iowa was a top 5 team to begin the year, one of the favorites to win the Big Ten, and is still a top 10 team in the country. So from that perspective, I can't fault you whatsoever. I have Illinois at 4 as well. I still have concerns about this. Is more about I have more faith in Illinois than anybody else that might go on this list at the back half right now. Villanova, I don't have a ton of faith in right now. Iowa, I still have this. I have similar concerns. some of the concerns I just voiced, in the fact that they can be really vulnerable if they don't shoot it well, and them having bad defensive lapses is not an uncommon occurrence. Ohio State, I have really big concerns about their offense right now, and Illinois' offense functions similarly in that it's very dependent on a couple of guys, but Dosunmu and Coburn, I'd take Dosunmu and Coburn before I'd take anybody on Ohio State. So that fact puts them in fourth right now, and also just how they're playing. They're taking care of business right now, and Wisconsin, not a great basketball team, but also going and beating Wisconsin on the road without Ayo Dosunmu is impressive. And to get, you got 12 points from DeMonte Williams, you get 19 from Kofi Coburn, you get 17 from Andre Curbelo. If you just get these little, Grandison and Adam Miller, knock down a couple threes, if you just get these little bits of production elsewhere, and you get Dosunmu and Coburn to be the guys that we know they can be, then they can beat anybody in the country. I still have my reservations about Illinois, like you said, Josh, getting all the way there. I mean, I'm more concerned about Illinois not showing up in the second round than not showing up in the Final Four against another really good team. But right now there are only 3 teams I have more faith in to get to the Final Four, at 9:56 on a Monday morning, a couple weeks before Selection Sunday. There are only 3 teams I have more faith in than Illinois right now. So that ultimately is why I had them fourth. Josh, who got the nod at the very end of your list?
Ohio State.
Okay.
And it's more about the other teams I had to choose from than it is the Buckeyes. Although their offense has been so consistent all season until this rough stretch that I think they're going to find a way to sort of work through this. And we understand their flaws. They can't guard bigs. They are very dependent on a couple offensive players. We talked about all that. I still have a lot of faith in Chris Holtmann to make sure his team pushes above their weight, which they still are doing, and to show up in the NCAA tournament. He's done a pretty good job of that throughout his career as well. Not so much at Ohio State, but specifically at Butler.
And even at Ohio State, you got guys overachieving, just over
right,
this point necessarily.
I'm talking specifically in the NCAA tournament.
Oh, okay, yeah.
They haven't, he hasn't put together a deep run, but it's still early in his tenure there. But you're talking about these other teams. Alabama, I can't put them on a top 5 list. They're too inconsistent for me. Oklahoma, I'm just not in love with their ceiling. It's as impressive as they've been this season. Villanova, no, thank you. Which leaves Iowa, which is the next team I would have. The other concern that I have that neither of you have mentioned yet, and partially this is just because of my admiration for this player, I love Jack Nungy. And not having him available to spell Luka Garza, it is not their biggest concern. Their biggest concern is whether they can keep playing defense like this. Because if they can play defense like this, they probably deserve spot number 5. But he is so impressive and dangerous when he's on the floor. The fact that you can swap him and Garza and he can hit the 3. I think he's one of the most underrated bench players in the country because he just doesn't get the minutes because he's playing behind Luka Garza. He's the kind of guy that can make a difference in a game and really helps their bench. And so to not have him tip the scales a little bit for me in favor of Ohio State as well. So I would have Iowa 6. I'm not going to completely jump ship on the Buckeyes because they've had a rough stretch here.
That's admirable. Sticking with them. I like that. Chris, who's 5th on your list?
Yeah, so when I was revealing Iowa as my number 4, I gave my sort of philosophy of not picking Illinois there, but after all that, I'm going to go with Illinois at 5. Now, I originally had Ohio State at 5, and I've been thinking about it, and I'm going Illinois. And, like we've talked about this, I don't really have much to add. I will say that their vulnerabilities scare me a little bit. And I mean, they scare me a decent amount. And I know that I don't know why I am more concerned about them than I'm concerned about Iowa's. Like, it may just be unfair. I don't know why. It may just be my Illinois philosophy toward that team. It's because it's such a long-standing. I don't know why, but I just have sort of this gut feeling where I feel like come March, like you guys said, I'm sort of concerned. Like if they make this deep run in the NCAA tournament, wouldn't surprise me. And if they made it that far, if they make it to the Final Four, wouldn't surprise me if they go all the way. There's a part of me though, it just has this gut feeling that something's going to go wrong for them in the second round, and it'll be a bad matchup, and something just won't line up for them. And we've seen their vulnerabilities before. But despite all this, I have them at 5. There's a reason I have them at 5, of course, and you guys have talked about, of course, we know what their upside can be as well. And I think upside wise, that's why I have them at number 5. Ohio State would be my 6. I had them close. And the reason I sort of, I guess, again, it comes down to some sort of a recency bias. But at the same time, I also think the way a team is trending down the stretch of a season in pretty much any sport carries a good amount of weight. Like, it's tricky because you don't want to put too much weight to it. But at the same time, we are in the stretch run here. So how teams are trending now does matter to me, because we're talking about who's going to make a national championship run here, not who I think is the best team. Because you could say this team is the best team, but they're trending in the wrong direction at the wrong time, and they're going to get stopped. Something's going to happen. And so that's sort of the tiebreaker for me, just the way the teams are trending right now. But Illinois at 5 for me. I'll stop talking. Ohio State just misses the cut, but I'm not bailing on them. They would be right there.
I really don't want to put Ohio State at 5. But I put Ohio State at 5. Because there was a point not all that long ago where I thought they were the 4th best team in the country. And they still might be the 4th best team in the country. So they're 5th on my list. I love Chris Holtman. And that I need them to play a better defense. If they get the wrong big guy on a 7 seed in the second round, they might lose.
Big trouble.
They might lose. Yeah. But I went with them at 5. Who I almost went with was Houston. I almost went with Houston. Talk about guards. I like having guards. Quentin Grimes and Marcus Sasser, that backcourt is pretty awesome. And Quentin Grimes is more than capable of being the best player on the floor against a good basketball team, and that matters to me. We have 3, the top 3 teams at KenPom right now on our list. You know who's 4th? Houston. As a top 10 offense and a top 5 defense. And that, in a nutshell, is why they at least can be considered for this list. I went with Ohio State slightly ahead of them, but and might even put Iowa ahead of them as well. But Houston, they have a great coach. They have really quality players. They have a really good backcourt and a top 5 defense. That seems like a pretty good combination for me. They've had some days where they just don't look good. I don't think the Wichita State loss is as big of a deal as maybe you'd think it is on paper. But losing to East Carolina, losing to Tulsa, those are the kind of hiccups that scare me just a little bit. But I think they're very close to this list too. But ultimately, I went with the Buckeyes at 5.
That's a good shout. Yeah, I feel better about them than Alabama or Villanova at this point.
Sure. Yeah. I think I would have to agree with that. Definitely. Let's take a quick break. It's 10 o'clock, but we're going to take a quick break, come back, do winners and losers. You're watching 110 Daily on the 110 Sports Network.